Good morning and good afternoon to those of you that are joining us from the East Coast. And welcome to another GotSafety presentation. I am Rick Roman.
Hey, this is Steve Crawley, and I know I look a little different. Normally we have our grand leader, Michael Crawley, here, but due to some other conflicts that he's had, I get the opportunity to sit in the big chair here with the bear behind me. So it's good to be with you, Rick. It's good to be with you.
Great to have you. And people are joining into the room here. Just want to remind everybody that there will be a replay. If you're signed up for this webinar, you'll get a replay link later this afternoon. For those of you that attended yesterday's webinar, we normally don't do two of them back to back like this, Steve, but this new quick regulation came out of California, really caused us, we didn't want to wait. We needed to get this information out to you all.
Could not be helped, Rick. It could not be helped.
So we had to do two in a row here, but for those that joined us yesterday, I understand there may have been a little snafu with the replay link. We'll be getting that corrected and sent out to you later this afternoon as well, so that you can get the correct replay link to the webinar from yesterday. But anyway, so there will be a replay. We will also have the slides available for you to download at the end of the presentation here, right from within the system. And we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. And we will be able to take care of those when we get to that spot. So let me go ahead and get my screen shared over here. And we can go ahead and get started. And there we go. So we are free at last, Steve.
How free are we, Rick? How free are we?
Well, it kind of depends, right? It depends on if you are vaccinated or not. You will get some additional freedoms. Now, they told us that we were going to need about 2 months to flatten the curve, and doggone it, we were able to do it in only 15 months. Woo! And here we are.
That's what I'm talking about.
So on June 17th, we had regulations updated on the OSHA code 3205, where they gave us some additional freedoms and added some different stipulations and changed a couple of things with the code. And immediately thereafter, Governor Newsom signed an executive order making it effective immediately. So therefore, thus the rush to get this information out to you so that we can get everyone up to speed. Everyone's had so many questions. We don't have to wear masks anymore. Right. Do we have to do this? Do we have to do that? And we just wanted to get you the lowdown here so that you can see really what's going on with all of these changes. Right. So as we look, I mentioned the biggest freedoms obviously are going to come to those who are fully vaccinated. So fully vaccinated means 2 weeks after you have received either your second shot, if you have the 2-dose system, or the first, if you in the like the Johnson & Johnson, where you're just getting one. But for fully vaccinated people, they will no longer need to be tested unless they're showing symptoms if they've been exposed to COVID. So that's the first thing. So you no longer have to offer testing to your folks that are fully vaccinated if they've been exposed, unless they're showing symptoms. The quarantining, they no longer have to quarantine again unless they're showing symptoms. So they can be exposed. They don't have to test. They don't have to quarantine. They can just go on about their business. They also do not have to wear face coverings indoors or out. Now, there are some stipulations, and we're going to get a little bit more into that when we get to that slide. But then the last part is the vaccination status. So in order for someone to qualify for, let's call them these benefits of being able to not wear the masks and quarantine and all that, they have to show that they have been been vaccinated. And this is where it could be, get a little bit dicey. So vaccination status must be documented. The revised ETS does not specify a particular method. The method must be recorded, the vaccination status for any employee not wearing face coverings indoors. And this record must be kept confidential. So acceptable options include employees providing a proof of vaccine and via a card or a health document, and then the employer can maintain a copy of it, or the employee can provide the proof and then the employer does not keep a copy of it. But then obviously you'd have to make record of it and have the employee sign that to show that you've seen that and received that. And then the last one is where the employee can self-attest. Again, you'd need to have that documented and have them sign where they have self-attested that they have been vaccinated.
Right.
Well, so Steve, what are your thoughts on some of this and requiring the vaccine status?
Well, Rick, the one thing that I see right from the get-go is that it can be a little confusing for employers. When employers looks at the three different mechanisms, the three different ways we can do it, they're trying to make it so that the employee doesn't feel pushed or threatened to their job would be there to show a card or even push to get the vaccination, Rick. So I guess the point that I would really make is, when you're looking at your employees and you're trying to fulfill this vaccination status rule, it would be real important to talk to some kind of a labor law attorney, someone that's working with you, because there could be HIPAA law issues here. And of course, we're not labor law people. We don't profess that, but this is what this order is talking about. And you've really got to talk with some of your labor law attorney about what fits your business. How is it best going to be fulfilled for you guys? Because the one thing that is clear to us throughout all this is this kind of documentation, and we're going to be talking about more things that need to be tracked. This kind of documentation is not going to be just kind of pushed to the side. They're going to want to see all this stuff if they come to see you, if you have any issues.
Right. And so, yeah, it's very important that you understand that while it is a requirement of OSHA, there are things that are being contested and have been being contested, right, where you might be violating one rule in order to keep the other. So those are areas where, as Steve mentioned, that you're going to want to consult with a labor law attorney and get some direction there. But under the ETS, the employer is not obligated to require them to submit the proof of being fully vaccinated. Absent such a requirement, the employee has the right to decline. So even if you ask them to state their status, they have the opportunity to decline. And in that case, the employer must treat the employee as unvaccinated and must not take disciplinary or discriminatory action against the employee. So they're fully within their rights to say, you know what, I don't want to profess one way or the other whether I've been vaccinated or not. But then they need to be treated as if they are not vaccinated, and thus they'd have to wear the masks.
And that's important going forward, right, Rick? I mean, what's important is if they haven't declared or they don't want to declare it either way, that automatic declaration, right? By not declaring, you're declaring. Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
in a sense,
weird.
Yes.
But yeah, so because they're going to be considered unvaccinated, some of the things, Rick, and we're going to go over are going to talk specifically to that issue. So
exactly. So let's move on to the next here. So let's talk some about face coverings. So face coverings are required indoors and in vehicles for unvaccinated employees. Employers must provide face coverings to unvaccinated persons and make them available to vaccinated persons upon request. Talk about the approved, because this is something new where they've kind of defined what's approved and not approved, Steve.
Right. So what's approved is surgical masks, medical procedure masks, respirators when worn voluntarily, and tightly woven fabrics or not woven material at least 2 layers. And when we talk about not woven materials, some of those marine suits, I've been able to get some masks where it's not a fabric at all. It's more of a neoprene kind of suit, right? I can hardly breathe in those things, but that's what they're talking about, right? When they mention, and then it has to be 2 layers. So that's pretty protective. Now, what's interesting is what was, in some cases, what was approved before, here's the non-proof, as you can see, a scarf, a ski mask. Now, Rick, you and I talked about a baklava, and this is not a tasty dessert from Greece. We're talking about one of the baklavas. It's a full head covering that goes down to the neck, and basically all it has is your eyeballs, right, poking out. Now, I cannot imagine in the summer anybody wanting to wear that anyway, but bandana, turtleneck, collar of your shirt, I'm assuming, and a single layer fabric. And I know they can't name everything here, but if you looked at anything else that people have been wearing as masks, you can see that they're really pushing you to anything that's a professional prepared mask, respirator, or some of those other masks that are just, woven or, other materials that are 2 layers. So you can see that they're just not wanting you to put on a shirt and cover your mouth. That's really the
exactly
issue, right?
Yep, you're getting rid of all the makeshift stuff.
Right.
More on the face coverings. No face coverings outdoors except during outbreaks. So that's one of the stipulations, right? We said if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear them indoors or out. But this would be one of the stipulations where you would if there's an outbreak at your facility. And Steve, talk a little bit about what remind folks of what the outbreak situations are.
So when we talk about an outbreak, we're talking about 3 or more individuals exposed in a group within a 10-day period. So if you're in a group, and this group, when we talk about groups, we talk about individuals where they're going to the same places. Let's say they work within each other. They go to the same break rooms. You're using the same bathrooms. That's the kind of group we're talking about. So even if I were to work in a factory and I'm 100 yards away at another place working all day, if I go to the same restroom, those individuals who are, who have been exposed, I'm part of this group. So one of the things that we have to be aware of is that's what's considered an outbreak. And just so that you understand, a major outbreak is defined as 20 individuals in that same group in a 30-day period. And there are some pretty strict things with regard to that we'll talk about later, but that's a work group.
Yes, and that was actually one of the language changes where they used to talk about an exposed workplace. Now it's the exposed group, right? Because here at our offices, we actually have 2 buildings here. So we don't share the same lunchroom. We don't share the same bathroom. So you could technically have, while we're all at the same workplace, we're in a different group and may or may not be exposed if we were to have an issue here. And
but Rick, if I go up and visit Bob and I walk up there and I pass through the break room and I walk by some of the exposed individuals, I don't do it all the time, but it's once here, once there. Am I part of that exposed group?
Well, then it would kind of fall back under the same regulation where if you'd spent 15 minutes, if you'd spent 15 minutes over there within 6 feet of those folks and they were, and technically, if you were within that room, then yes, now you've exposed that group as well.
Right.
So now so for those folks that are not wearing their masks, the workers need to be trained on the CDPH, which is the California Department of Public Health. They need to be trained on their recommendations for outdoor use of face coverings. Because basically they're still, while it's not an OSHA requirement to wear them now, the CDC still recommends that people be wearing them. And so even though they don't have to wear them now, we at least need to let them know that, look, it's still recommended by the CDC that you wear these, and the public health. And so you have to provide that training for them. Now, again, regardless of what your vaccination status, and here's another one of those rules. If you're in public transit, or if you're working K through 12 educational facilities, healthcare, long-term care, correctional and detention facilities, shelters, homeless or emergency shelters, and cooling centers, they don't care whether you're vaccinated or not. If you're working in those areas, you're still going to be required to wear your mask. So that's one of the exceptions that they talk about, and the stipulations to the folks that are vaccinated not wearing masks.
Rick, what is a cooling center? Come on.
I've never really seen one, but I'm only imagining that in some of these towns where possibly that get some real high heat, some of the more inland areas, maybe for homeless to be able to go somewhere where they've got maybe some kind of air misters and different areas where folks can cool off.
That's nice. It's not just for the happening people then. It's more for just I get it.
All right. So there you go. So in outbreaks, as Steve just defined for you, three or more, or the major outbreak, 20 or more. So 3 or more in 14 days, or 20 or more in 30 days. Employees must wear the face coverings indoors and outdoors, outdoors when 6 feet of physical distancing cannot be maintained, regardless of vaccination status. Right. So just know, if you're in that funky status there at your place of business, you're back to wearing masks. And again, for those who don't have to wear them, some of them may not feel comfortable, Steve, in not wearing them. They may not be 100% convinced that their vaccination has completely inoculated them, correct?
Right.
And therefore we cannot retaliate against those folks or discriminate. They are within their right to wear the mask if they would like to, and it makes them more comfortable.
You know, in this day and age where we're all just wanting to strip that mask right off, right, and actually start seeing people except for their eyes, and the point being is we just want to make sure that individuals aren't made fun of and made to feel less than because they want to keep wearing the mask. So I get it.
Yep. So respirators, Steve. Now this we've been getting a lot of questions about the respirators.
Right.
So the employer must provide respirators in these two scenarios: to any unvaccinated employee who works with others indoors or in a vehicle and who requests one, or where there's a major outbreak to any employees in the exposed group for voluntary use. So that would include, again, your vaccinated folks. If they wanted to wear the respirator, now you'd have to even provide it for them. The respirator obviously must be the right size. The employee must receive the basic instruction on how to get a good seal or fit. Right. Steve, what do you think about? I know you've heard some of the questions coming in about this, and what are your thoughts and recommendations regarding the respirators in general?
Well, in general, there's a respiratory program, Rick, as you well know, for those that use these respirators as part of their normal business operations. The rule that's come out does not decide or tell you that if you choose, or if you have people who voluntarily want to wear respirators, it doesn't say that then if the employer is providing these respirators to his employees, he must have a respiratory program. Doesn't say you have to have it, but it is saying that the employers must provide them in these two scenarios. And so it's our recommendation that whether your business, which is obviously by default, if your business is using respirators as part of your normal course of operation, you should have a respiratory program anyway. It's required. It is our recommendation that if you are using respirators as masks voluntarily, you get a respiratory program. We have seen over and over in the defense of our clients that people are being cited for not having respiratory programs when people are wearing these respirators. I know we keep saying the word respirator. It sounds kind of weird, but the fact remains is even if it's voluntary wear, you've got to have a program. And Cal OSHA says that. So I hope that works, Rick.
And that N95 that many of you might think of as a dust mask is classified as a respirator.
Right.
And as Steve mentioned, we've seen multiple people that have been cited when their folks were wearing these, even on a voluntary basis. So as Steve mentioned, that we recommend having that program. Now, we're not going to make that decision for you. If you have documentation from GotSafety already and you want that program, we are more than happy to add that to your library. There's no additional cost for it. We'll just put it in if you want it, but the choice is yours.
Yes.
So that's something that you're going to have to make the decisions on how you're going to want to handle that, and then we'll help you to accommodate that for you. So here's a good one. The social distancing. No physical distancing or barrier requirements regardless of employee vaccination status, with the following exceptions. The employees must evaluate whether it's necessary to implement physical distancing and barriers during an outbreak, 3 or more cases in an exposed group of employees. So that means if you're not in that case, you don't have to have the barriers. But if you get into that 3 or more, well, now you have to evaluate. Doesn't necessarily even still say you'll have to have them. But you have to go and do an assessment and evaluate whether you think you're going to need to do that to curb this or not.
Rick, just so you know, it seems like these new rules are putting an enormous amount of judgment on the employers. Am I wrong on that? Because here we are, they've got to make another decision on whether or not in their work environment, in the context of what they do, are the barriers, needed or not under certain guidelines.
That's totally true. There's a lot of these things where they're pretty vague, and it really puts you in a spot to where it's not a problem until it's a problem.
Exactly right.
And so if you have an issue, if you have 3 or more and you do an evaluation and you decide we don't need barriers, and then all of a sudden you have several more cases break out, well, now you may have a problem because you made the wrong choice and that you didn't put in the barriers. Now, a lot of you already have some of those barriers. So do you want to take them down or not? Well, that's a choice you have to make. If you don't already have them up, well, you certainly don't need to really contemplate it until you get yourself into that boat where you got 3 or more and you have to assess. Or the second example in where you have to have them is when you got the major outbreak with the 20 or more cases. Then you have to implement that physical distancing. Other than that, no physical distancing requirements are required whatsoever in the employee provided housing and transportation regulations. So if you're a lot of times we have our clients in the agricultural field where they actually provide housing for their folks. So there you don't have to have any physical distancing requirements there. Or where all employees are vaccinated and the employer provided housing and transportation, they're exempt from the rules and regulations. So that's really kind of a relief on, even though if you're not vaccinated and you're still wearing the masks, boy, just the social distancing, Steve, being able to, have more people come into your place and have your workers coming back in really makes a big difference, wouldn't you say?
I would absolutely say. But, even with what looks like more freedom on this end, Rick, they're putting an enormous amount of not pressure, but they're putting an enormous amount of responsibility on the owner.
That's the word.
To make sure that owner is making the correct decisions. And it's hard not to see an owner want to, err on the side of safety. Do you know what I mean? With all these vague rules. So it's tough. It's tough.
Yep. And just as your employees have the right not to declare and then you treat them as vaccinated, you as an employer also have the right to say, you know what? I still want to live by the other rules. I still want my folks to wear masks. If you want your folks to wear the masks, you can still do those things. But like Steve says, where you get some of these freedoms, some additional responsibilities get placed on you as well.
You bet.
So then when it comes to testings, so employers must offer testing at no cost to employees during paid time to symptomatic, unvaccinated employees, regardless of whether there was a known exposure. So this is a new requirement, right? So before, if you weren't exposed at work you were sick, well, now maybe you got it at grandma's. There's no one else here that's even been sick. You might have been out visiting. It's not work related. Well, now if the employee is showing symptoms, regardless whether I know where they were exposed, the employer has to pay. Unvaccinated employees, after they've been exposed, obviously have to be if they've been exposed there at work, obviously you have to pay them to get tested. Vaccinated employees, after an exposure, if they develop symptoms. If you remember the first slide, we said we don't have to offer testing to the vaccinated, but if they're showing symptoms, then we have to do it. Unvaccinated employees, if there's an outbreak, again, we have to offer them to get the testing, and the company has to pay for that as well. And then, of course, in a major outbreak. Now, there are some things that really haven't changed, right? So the Title 8 3205, and that's really what we've been talking about here. But then there was also, if you guys recall, back last September, the California AB 685 came out, where it talked about the notification to employees when you've had exposures in your workplace, the notifications to the health department when you've had a certain amount of cases. Those rules are slated to stay in effect until January of 2023. But there are other rules that are part of the 3205 code, which didn't change in terms of this was all initially set up to expire in October. However, they still do have the option, and they have put together a 3-person committee that is going to be looking at other things to see about any other future changes to the program, possible extension of the program, because they had said all along that they had the ability to extend additional time to this program. Right now we're looking at October, but if it does get extended, obviously we will keep you posted. But all of those other things that were put in place are still required. One of them being that you have to have an effective written COVID-19 prevention plan. Now, those of you that are clients of ours, which most of you are, and have GotSafety documentation, we're making all those changes for you. Again, that's at no charge. It's included in your service. We're updating those documents. Some of them have already been done. We anticipate having everyone completed by the end of the week, at which time an email will be going out to all of you, letting you know that everything is up to date. So, but those of you who don't already have one, need to get one or update the program that you currently have. You still need to provide training and instruction to your employees and notify them of their rights under the ETS. You have to provide notification, as I mentioned, still to the public health departments of outbreaks, provide notifications to the employees of exposure and close contacts.
Hey, Rick, just not to bring up, but I'll tell you, some of the things that we've seen lately with regard to some of the heaviest citations that we have seen come about the notification of either the health departments.
Yes.
And it has been unruly. And it seems it doesn't matter whether these people went to the hospital on a weekend or the day after work. It is really it's really an interesting thing when it deals with this. So I guess I only want to highlight that because we could go off saying if somebody were to leave work during the day sick, that's obviously something we want to keep track of.
Yes.
But it is one of those things we're seeing where when people are at home and they end up going to the department, to the hospital because they have a problem, it tends to make a real sticky situation for the employer to have to talk through this and why you didn't report it. You know what I mean, Rick?
Yes. I mean, you really got to be on top and keeping track of it and communicating to those.
Right.
We did a webinar a couple of months ago for those that either are in the temporary agency business or people who use them, and communicating back and forth between each other as well, because you need to notify them and keep them in the loop when you got that dual employer relationship, because some of this stuff is coming out months later.
Right.
That they're finding out that, somebody had an illness. Now things weren't recorded, and the fines, like Steve mentioned, some of the larger fines that we've been seeing in the OSHA cases lately have come from these COVID cases. There have been some huge ones in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
I mean,
it's awful. It's awful.
And several all over the place below that as well. So,
and Rick, these are good employers. These are conscientious, law-abiding employers that, with all the changes in the laws and everything coming down on them, it makes it really difficult to just keep holding on to every little thing. So
exactly.
It's awful.
So, so you still, as I mentioned, you got to provide notification to the employees. You have to offer testing after the exposures. That's still all the same. Responding to COVID cases and outbreaks, meaning, doing your assessments and seeing what's going on. All that stuff is staying the same. The exclusion pay requirements for when your folks, now they did make the change also where it used to be 14 days. Now they said a while back, because the CDC, right after the new law came into effect, where OSHA was using the 14-day standard, both for the quarantine time or the time that somebody was considered, the exposure time. CDC had changed it to 10 days. Now, OSHA, not long after that, said they would recognize the 10 days. But in the code, it still said 14. So we had a hard time telling people go by the 10 days when the law actually says 14. And boy, that could be a problem. Well, now they've restated it, and we've got the 10 days on the exclusionary, but they do have to be paid during that time. And then the basic prevention requirements provided for housing and transportation. So all of those things are the same. Steve, any other thoughts as far as that? That's pretty much what's going on with the program. What other thoughts do you have?
I'll tell you this, Rick, and I'm really talking to the folks that are out there. Whether you're an employer that doesn't have employees but uses temporary staffing, or you're providing temporary staffing, whether you're an employer with 3 people or 3,000 people, the simple fact is you really have to have a program that is taking into account all these rules. And as Rick and I have brought up, some of the requirements of you to be able to track and make sure that you've got some kind of tracing to understand what your effective group is. If you have an exposed group, you now know that you need to keep track of who's in and out, who's going where, and who's going to be a part of that in case you have that issue come up. So it's really important that you have a program in place, and I'll let you know we can help you. And if there is any questions you have, I would ask you, send us an email. Send Rick an email. Give us a call. Ask your question. You don't have to be a client to ask a question. We want to help you understand what's going on here. And if you need more than just a question of help, we're here to help you with that.
Also, just as a reminder, for those of you folks who do need to update your programs, if you have not already received documentation from GotSafety, because of course we will be updating that part of the service. But for those of you that need to update these programs, or if you don't have them and you need to get them and what have you, hopefully as an incentive to help you with that, we're going to be doing till the end of this month, we're going to do 25% off of our normal pricing. Hopefully that could be a help for you to get those caught up to date if you're needing that, and we're happy to do that. Haven, do you have some questions for us?
If someone is vaccinated, do they still need to wear a mask?
Well, that is no.
No, unless
Yes.
they work in one of those fields that we mentioned,
Right.
Such as what was it? Public transportation,
Right.
medical, correctionals, homeless shelters, things like that.
Schools, K through
schools.
12.
Yep. And aside from that, if when their company is in the status of an outbreak, then they would have to wear them. But other than that, vaccinated people do not have to wear them indoors or out, but provided that they have documented with the employer that they, either through showing them the medical record or self-professing on some sort of signed record that shows that the company has to basically document them as being vaccinated. We can't have folks running around that are not wearing. Well, now that's another responsibility now puts, especially when you got a lot of employees, right? You got half the guys running around with and half without masks, and you got to determine, hey, is that guy vaccinated? Do we have records or not? But that's really the boat you're in. You got to make sure that it's documented. If it's not documented, then they don't get the privileges.
And the employer has to provide those masks, right? So if there's an issue with regards to wearing them, if an outbreak, major outbreak, or you're in one of those protected areas where K through 12 and what have you, the employers have to provide your masks. So
speaking of documentation, should they be keeping hard copies of the vaccination records? And if so, how long?
Well, they may or may not. If you recall, there were two options. As an employee, I may say to you, here, take a photostatic copy of my vaccination record and keep it on file, or here it is, you can see it, but you can't keep it, in which case they would have to write some kind of documented record.
There was that third option where the guy says, I don't want to answer your questions.
Oh, yeah. Well, if he doesn't answer his questions, then you're treated as unvaccinated. You don't get to go maskless. But the third option actually was to just self-profess. I'm not showing you nothing, but I'm telling you that I'm vaccinated. That's even good enough. But again, how do I prove that? I'm going to need some kind of signed affidavit, right? I mean, I need a letter that basically says, Bob says that he's been vaccinated on such and such date, and then Bob signs it. How long do you need to keep it? I would probably keep it for at least 3 to 5 years, because the problem is, like we mentioned with the citations we're seeing, even once this regulation is lifted, if they're doing somehow any kind of investigation a year or two down the road and come back, you better have something to be able to show.
Hey, Rick, I saw a question here that has happened. I'm looking at the questions. It says, what about those who have had COVID and have the antibodies? Are they considered vaccinated?
No.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Those antibodies don't last forever, right? They don't last forever.
And it's different amount of times with different people, I'm sure.
It is. So to be vaccinated, please know you got to be vaccinated with one of the shots, right? Either the 2-shot or the 1-shot, but it's got to be done. Yeah.
Another popular one I got here asked by many people is it required to pay for time off on top of paying for the test?
If the time off is due to, if they're having to quarantine, you have to pay them the time off. Absolutely. So if they're time off, yes, that's why when it go, and even if you're talking about just the test, it says that you have to send them during like working hours, right? You got to send him to now. Well, what if my guy works graveyard? I can't send him there. He's basically going to be put on the clock for that time that he's going to go.
Okay, perfect. Time. Another company said they split their employees into 2 shifts because to comply with policy. Should they still be doing that, or can they go back to 1 shift?
Well, that's really a choice that they get to make, right? I mean, if those 2 shifts, literally, if you don't cross paths, if you have a half hour in between them to where they're literally not interacting, well, then I guess it's going to help you on exposed groups, right?
Right.
But boy, if there's any intermingling over there, I mean, you could still have issues. I mean, you really got to look at what your operation is to determine whether the shifts bit helps you or not.
Right. That's a tough call. That is a tough call.
All right. Another common question. So if someone gets the shot and the symptoms cause them to miss work, should they be required to pay for the days missed work after the shot?
Oh, wow. It's a good call. It's a good question.
I heard a little bit about that. So, that's why I would think as a company that I would not want to mandate that people get the shot, because now, because I heard something here a little while back that if you're forcing them to get it, well, then now if they have side effects, if they have any kind of problems, that could now be considered a work comp issue. And so, boy, you might have to, when it comes to this, you might need to check with your labor law attorney on that as well. OSHA is not really stated one way or another as far as you having to pay them a side effect.
The company has to develop a policy of what they're going to do. And I know this is a unique situation. And when I say unique, the last year and a half, has been a unique situation where, sick time, everything's COVID, everything. So,
yep.
Should they still be temperature checking their employees? Did you go over that?
No.
I think that the temperature checking, those were all pretty much by the different public health departments. So you still got to be staying on top of what your local health department is wanting. So from county to county, those things are varying. I would imagine some of that's going away, but again, you have to check with your local counties.
Okay, and along with that, I guess the pre-screens, are they still required? Asking the questions, have you had a fever?
I know companies that are still doing it, Rick. I know they're still doing it. In fact, some of the companies have a form that their employees fill out every morning, and once they fill that form out, they send it in, and it just gives those few questions here and there. So, that certainly isn't a requirement, but it's certainly for tracing.
Hey, I'm just wanting to validate. Somebody is asking regarding doing like the pre-screening and all of that. Is that like county by county stuff, or is that still mandated?
It's fantastic.
That is
fantastic.
It's customer service.
It is. Hey, while Mike is answering the question, Rick is answering the question, any other questions that we can get, Haven?
Excellent. Thank you. Yep. Okay, so according to the new regulation, yes, you do still need to have some sort of screening mechanism in place.
Okay. Good call, Rick. And
all right, and then we're coming on down to the last, but this one gets asked by a lot of people. How many times do they have to pay for their employees to self-quarantine?
How many days, you mean?
How many times?
I guess if it happens more than once.
Okay. As many times as they get exposed. So if I get exposed and I got to go quarantine for the 10 days, it's not 14 anymore, it's 10. And then turns out I never get sick. I come back to work and then I get exposed 3 days later. Well, I'm back in the hopper.
Right.
All right. And then a lot of people did comment on the cooling center. It is for cities with high heat and elderly or homeless communities. And they are just places you can go to cool down. But that's all I have for you guys.
Well, there you go. We learned something.
And for those that are hipsters and, very, suave kind of people, maybe. All right.
All right. Well, with that being said, we know it's we were like 45 minutes in, and you folks got to get back to work. So we really appreciate you hanging out with us, especially those of you that did 2 days in a row of this madness. Like I said, we've never done it like this before, but this came out, was put into place instantly, and we really felt the need not to have you wait so that you could get the information. And so it just so happened we already had one scheduled and we didn't want to cancel. So anyway, we really appreciate you guys. We appreciate all of you that work with GotSafety. And like Steve said, if you got anything, give us a call. We're here to help, and whatever we can do, we're here for you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, folks. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye-bye.